to or bust. And basically the project that we're working on is the test scheduling environment. And this would be particularly would be used, for example, by an oil company like Halliburton, who would use this to schedule environmental testing on many facilities that they have. And basically the biggest things that the project needs to deliver are going to be the ability to go ahead and request work to be done. For example, like multiple tests to be issued on one single work request, or to be split up among many. The application should also have the ability to have this only executed upon approval by a manager, or it should also have the ability to be approved by a super admin, someone who's above the manager. The biggest thing apart from that would be the ability to retrieve any data that these work requests also generate, and that's pretty much the biggest impact that the testing center should have. So for this iteration, what we worked on would be like bringing the work request form, and basically what this does, it'll go ahead and take, for example, like a test location, a requester, the charge code that you would use, a description that you would like to put, or any optional comments, among some other fields that are necessary for this to happen. And what we did is, in order to have, we went ahead and we split up the work into two teams. So we had a dedicated front-end team that created the UI, and we also had a dedicated back-end team. So what you see here is actually being connected to via a database. We're using Mongo, and basically what it does is, like, we actually have it set so that it will validate all the requests that we're creating, and creating or editing. And for example, you'll see right here that you have like the requester, the request ID, the charge code, a description tool, and any tasks will be saved in an array of references, so that the application can then go ahead and request those references later as well from the MongoDB. And to show you a little bit more about the validation, basically what we have is, we've had these fields specifically set to these types, or they must exist, so that if someone else tries to, for example, submit an incomplete request, the database will actually error out and send a validation error that we can handle on our end. So this is one of the biggest things that our sponsor communicated that they wanted us to do. They wanted us to basically treat this as a real production environment. You know, in a real world scenario, you don't want just abstract data floating around in your database that might, cause issues later on down the road. So in order to make all this work, we actually created an API, which we're using this framework called Feathers. And basically what Feathers will allow us to do is to use these. I'll be using Postman right here, but basically it'll let you go ahead and read like all your requests. So in this example right here, if you navigate just to like the API, the request endpoint here, it'll actually return all the work requests that you have at the moment, along with your tasks, so that if you needed them, you can go ahead and retrieve those as well. We also have made sure that it has the ability to create a work request. So basically, if you wanted to create a request, it's going to follow like the REST API. So you'll go ahead and use the post method, and as long as, like I said, it has the validation fields that are required, it'll go ahead and successfully create that for you as well. And we do have the ability just to, like, either, if you wanted just to look at one single work request, for example, if you're just searching for this later down the road for an approval, you can go ahead and do that as well, and it'll return the specific work request. And lastly, if you wanted to, for example, cancel something that you submitted, you also have the option to delete it. In this case, so this is going to be this is the confirmation that that's going to delete this request, and if you send it again, it should show you that the request was deleted since it was removed from the database. One of the biggest things that we faced probably was that we also Dockerized the applications. So we wanted this to be portable. It didn't have to rely on like OS or Azure or any of the other cloud providers. As long as they supported like the container system, you would go ahead and be able to deploy this wherever you wanted. So all of our everything that we're running right now, for example, even the MongoDB, it's completely Dockerized. And I actually pushed this, we have this pushed up to a registry, a Docker Hub. So we don't even have to have the actual Mongo files that we used to build this. It's continuously being updated, and you can just pull it from the cloud, so to speak. So this is probably what was one of the biggest things that we faced, because containers by nature, they don't really have, it's a little hard to continuously move around the data that you're playing with. So I had to run a script that would go ahead and first take a Mongo dump and then push it onto there, and then build the Docker container, so I would always have the data that we're needing. That was definitely a very tough issue that came along the way. And as far as how we organized our work, so we're using Trello, which is a free Kanban board, and basically what we're doing is we're issuing these tasks inside our backlog, and we're assigning them priorities. So, for example, you have like the lower priorities, higher priorities, and the medium priorities, and along with that, we go ahead and add in like tags. For example, like if you're going to be needing Angular, or if, for example, you're going to need to know Jasmine for like unit testing, we'll go ahead and attach that as well. And this helps us stay on top of things, so that we know exactly who's working on what. And like, for example, a good example would be like if you're both committing to something, it wouldn't be on the same lines because you're working on completely different things, or at least if you're working together, you at least know who you're working with and who to communicate with. And it serves as a great tool because it shows us exactly when we would like to have these things done, and it sends you reminders for these things. As far as what we're going to be doing for like what we did was create like the basic navigation components, the layout of the wireframe of the website, and creating new work request component. And for the next iteration, we're making sure that the work request component can actually connect to the API using the HTTP client built into Angular, and that we have the option on top of the work request to also create drafts and just have them saved for submission later. And if you take a look, at the back end, it's very similar. And what we try to do is we try to have the back end mimic what the front end was doing, so that we can have a working product come out a little faster. Because if our back end is working on a specific component that has nothing to do with what the front end is working, you might get work done, but you won't have anything to deliver. So the same thing happened. We're working on we're creating work request API, and we setting up the unit testing so that all the unit testing runs for both the front end and the back end. And as far as when we met up with our sponsor, we got a little bit more clarity as to what they were expecting, and we added a little bit more tasks to our backlog, something that you would want to see inside an agile development. And so, as far as code coverage, at the moment we have our front end has actually a pretty high code coverage. At the moment, it's for the most part close to 100%. And what we're going to try to do is keep it around this level, so that as soon as we create something new or we change something, we're immediately notified if it's broken. And this will also error out whenever we run it with Jenkins, which is a very handy thing to have. And this is the same thing, but this is going to be for the back end. And what it does is we're using Istanbul for the back end unit testing. And the cool thing about that is it actually tells you what lines you're missing unit tests. So this gives us an extra indicator on where we should be working on. And I think that's pretty much it.